All right, folks, that was that catchy tune and everything. I saw that some of the folks backstage were rocking to that catchy tune and were enjoying themselves as everything was going on. We are here on the radio show with Mark Lee, and of course, on a Monday afternoon. That means we're going to have some engaging and some wonderful conversation about all kinds of things going on. I know a lot of folks are definitely dealing with a lot of concerns around the world, whether that's your own personal economy, whether that's things going on with the pandemic that we're in the middle of, whether that's folks that are either celebrating or sad based on the elections. I know that I was actually glad with the results, but there might be some folks that are not in that same bag as me. So they might have been sad about the results. But of course, we still have to have that transition of power. And that seems to be taking a long time. And a lot of folks seem to be complaining about how that's going along. So we are all dealing with a lot of different issues. Of course, here in North Carolina, we did have some rain and some flood weather and all of that. So that took place last week. And I was part of a Black business conference that was going on all week last week as well. So there were a number of things that were happening. Got to give StreamYard a big shout out because they helped us both here doing this event, but they also helped us with that particular conference. So I want to give them a big shout out for giving us that big hand and all of that. But great times. And of course, I just came out from running some errands, had to get that hair trim, had not done that in a while and was starting to feel like Santa Claus. And even though December is around the corner, I did not feel like looking like Santa Claus and wanted to get it a little bit better and all of that. So went out there. The weather is lovely out there. It is getting a little bit on the cool side, but it's not too bad. I'd say it's probably around 70 or something like that. So that was enjoyable and it was good seeing people out and about. So definitely glad to see that. And folks were masked up and doing what they're supposed to do. But I've got some great guests that'll be joining me on this particular afternoon, and I'm looking forward to a very engaging conversation with them. And I'm going to bring up the first one who's going to talk about this great play that they've got, which is going to explore a lot about history. And I know sometimes we do not pay enough attention to the history that we've got going on in the world. And we know we've lost some true icons, people like John Lewis, people like here in Durham, North Carolina, Skippy Scarborough, who is one of our great historians and everything. So we have lost some true icons, of course, Miss Ginsburg from the Supreme Court and all of that, but definitely some true icons that have been lost. But there are folks that are trying to learn from the past and learn some lessons from the past. So we've got a person in our studios that is getting ready to join me now that has told the story of some of the things that were going on during the march around Selma and things of that nature. So I'm getting ready to bring in Miranda Berry, and she's going to share some stories along with Francois Hyman and Quiade Nora, and I'll be bringing them on shortly. But let's bring on Miss Berry first and see what she's got to say about what's going on in the world and just life in general, and the fact that they've got an exciting production that they're going to be doing on later on this week. So we'll find out about that as well. So let's bring in Miranda Berry. Hello, how are you doing?
I'm good. Good afternoon, Mark.
It's good afternoon. Great to see you. We met here in Durham when you were coming here and rallying up some of the forces and talking to people and telling about this project that you've got going on. And of course, a lot of things were held and stopped because of COVID, but y'all are not letting that stop y'all's world. Y'all are doing an event coming up very soon. So definitely tell our audience a little bit about this production and why it's so important, because I do believe that too often we don't know enough about our history. And we even talked about that a little bit with the Black Business Conference that I was part of this week, that we need to have explorations of our history and things of that nature so that we don't necessarily make the mistakes that we made in the past and that we can learn from those. So tell our listening audience, which is an international audience, a little bit about this production you've got. And then, of course, I'll bring in some of your crew as well. And then I've got another guest that might be joining us who is out of the world of politics from here in the North Carolina area. But I'd love to hear you talk about this great production and somebody that was turning 15 in the middle of all of this madness that was going on back in the 60s.
Yes, thank you, Mark. Yes, and you're about to meet Caswell Hyman, who is our director, and also Quiade Nora, who plays the leading role in Turning 15 on the Road to Freedom. And it's a musical play based on an award-winning book by Linda Blackman Lowry, who was the youngest person of the 300 official marchers who went all the way from Selma to Montgomery on the Voting Rights March in 1965. And, you mentioned some of the great heroes of the civil rights movement, and especially people that we've recently lost, such as John Lewis, who was, of course, in the front on that march and was badly beaten on Bloody Sunday, which
Right.
was a couple of weeks before the march that made it all the way to Montgomery. And Linda, too, was badly beaten on the Edmund Pettus Bridge on that day. She had 38 stitches, 7 on her forehead and 28 in the back of her head.
Yeah.
And this is the story of the foot soldiers of the movement.
Mm.
We all are very familiar with a lot of the leaders without whom the movement wouldn't have happened. Dr. King and John Lewis and
Right.
Amelia Boynton and many, many people in Alabama in the 60s. But by the same token, the thing that made me excited about producing this play and
Mm.
making it available to the public is I did not know that many of the foot soldiers of the civil rights movement were actually children. They were
Wow.
middle school and high school kids who would go to school in the morning and then sneak out the back door with the help of their teachers and go and participate in demonstrations. And Linda herself was in jail 9 times before her 15th birthday.
Wow.
And as she will tell you, she's a proud jailbird because she did not go to jail for hurting anybody, and she did not go to jail for taking anything from anybody. She went to jail for what she believes in.
Well, that's some fascinating stories, and I'm interested in hearing more of that. And I do think that, like I said, some of our students and our world need to know more of this history. And of course, we are an international platform on IBM TV, and I know even sometimes folks from other countries don't necessarily even know our stories and things of that nature. So I am going to bring in Mr. Hyman, and then I'll bring in some of our other folks as well. So definitely would love to hear why you got involved in the whole process and all of that. So definitely, if you could share a little bit about why you got involved and more about your own story. So I'd love to hear you share why you got involved in all, Mr. Hyman.
Hi, nice to meet you, Mark. I got involved in the project by invitation from Miranda Barry, who I had worked with many years ago on a television show for PBS called Ghostwriter. It was actually my first writing job for television. And so we go way back, Miranda and I. And she came down here to Wilmington. I'm in Wilmington, North Carolina. And she came down to see a production of Fences that I was in and brought up this idea, told me about the play that she was producing, which at the time was a one-woman show. And she asked if I would be interested in coming to New York and taking a look at the play and seeing if it could be opened up to bring in more characters and music. So, I read the book, I looked at the play, and started pulling out individual characters to have parts, like Dr. King and Linda's father, her friends, different people that she met along the way on this journey to Selma.
Wow.
And it worked out. Our little test workshop worked out. And a few months later, I went back and we cast the show. We had an amazing cast and put it on its feet. And it has evolved into the production that the audience will be seeing on Tuesday night on video.
Wow. And I'm here to bring in one of the talents as well, that being Kuyade Nora and everything. But before I do that, a lot of people don't even understand the history that goes on even here in our state of North Carolina. And I know that I'm here in Durham, but I know friends of mine have actually been involved in productions like Wilmington on Fire, which talks about even some of that history that was even before Selma and everything. So we definitely have had a lot of history here in North Carolina with various civil rights movements, including what went on in Wilmington way back in the late 1800s and everything, as well as some of the other things that are going on.
Yeah, the coup that took place in 1898 is a big part of Wilmington history. And
that's definitely a big part of the history, and a lot of folks don't know about that as well. So definitely that is one of the things that goes on, learning about this great history and everything. So definitely I'm going to bring in Kuyade as well, and then we'll see what why she got involved. So we're looking forward to having her on there. There we go. So Kuyate, tell us a little bit about how you got involved and what your own role in this production was. Because like I said, I understand you playing like one of the lead roles. So I'd love to hear more about how you got involved.
Yeah, so hello, Mark, and hey, Miranda, hey, Cass. So I originally got involved with the show as your standard New York audition process. So once I got started, what initially interested me was the fact that I found out that the show was actually written by Linda, and the fact that you usually don't get that many Black women who get to write their own narrative and have that much creative control. So I was excited when I first got a part of it because I was like, oh, this might be like a once in a lifetime situation. And from that point, I believe it's been about this December, I think will make it 2 years since I've been a part of the show. So I started initially as an ensemble member, and then about the time afterwards is when I went out for a lead and have been playing Linda since. And funny enough, Linda actually saw my headshot and spoke with producers and apparently like requested that I play her. So I thought that that was very special because you don't get that often. But Linda feels like family. I feel like we have this pretty much like have been extracted from the same DNA almost, like just very witty, very quick, with a mind. But also I just think that that passion and desire to like see something and not be afraid to speak up about it. So I think it's just so interesting. But that's how I got involved with learning on the road to
Sounds
freedom.
like y'all have all gotten involved in such a wonderful way and everything. And I love hearing these stories of history that is so relevant to what's going on now and everything. So you have this production that's coming up on tomorrow. So tell folks that are listening and watching about it. And for those that are in that area, how they can actually get involved and how they can attend this virtual showing that y'all are doing. So I would love to hear more about that. So I'll turn it over to you, Miranda, if you can tell folks about how they can get involved and how they can actually be part of it. I know that I've already gotten my tickets and everything, so I plan to be there. So if you can tell other folks how they can do that. And also, I'd love to hear from all of you how you think that this whole movement of what went on in Selma is relevant to what we're having going on in the world now, because there's so many things that seem parallels to me, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's what the Dreamers are doing, whether it's a number of the other struggles that folks are having and getting their voices be heard in the 21st century when these kind of marches were happening in the 60s. So if you could talk to both of those, Miranda, I'd love to hear your thoughts and then pass it on to the other folks. And then I'm going to bring in one of my politician friends from this area because he might have some thoughts as well.
Sounds great, Mark. So, yes, we were touring the show last winter, and we were actually in Columbus, Ohio, when we learned that the pandemic was going to shut down all live theater all over the country. So we all came back to New York, and for a time it looked pretty bleak there. Like we didn't know when we would ever be able to continue the show. But the one stroke of luck was that we happened to have recorded a performance that we did in New York City. It was actually Kuyate's first performance for a live audience of this role, and you will not believe that when you see the video. She is amazing in it. If you are, so we created a video version of the show, and this is a shorter version. It's really designed for schools and community groups. We still plan to go back onto the live stage when that's possible to do it, and we're co-producer is Vosa Rivers and the New Heritage Theater Group in New York City, which is the oldest African-American nonprofit theater group in New York. And Vosa is planning to work with us to do an off-Broadway production. So it will be back on the stage. But in the meantime, we have this video, and tomorrow afternoon at 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, for wherever your audiences may be, they need to adjust. We're going to be screening the 50-minute version of the show. And in between, we're having a panel discussion that includes Linda Blackman Lowry and Vosa Rivers and Kuyate. and also Dr. Erica Henderson, who is an educator from Facing History and Ourselves, which is an extraordinary international group for history educators. If anyone is interested in more information about attending that screening, you can go to our website, which is www.turning15ontheroad.com, and it's the number 15. So turning15ontheroad.com with no spaces. And there's a page there called streaming, and it's got all the information. So I would like to hear Kaz and Kuyade talk about the
Yes.
relevance of this project today.
Yes, I would love to hear that as well. So if they could talk about that relevance to the project and how it fits into what's going on now and everything. And I'll actually start with you, Coyote, because like I said, I know a lot of folks have been paying attention to Black Lives Matter, the role of the youth within Black Lives Matter, as well as some of the things that are going on with Me Too, which is more of the women's movement in the modern day context and things of that nature. So I would love to, if you could talk about the relevance of what was happening then to young talent and young activists. I would consider you, even though you're an actress, to be, an actor, to be an activist as well, so because of the nature of this role and everything. So I'd love to hear you talk about how you feel this is relevant to what's going on now.
Yeah, it's so interesting making the connections between the show and what's happening currently. And I almost think that it's almost like a divine timing that we were actually even doing the show before everything hit the fan. How, of all the shows that I personally could have been involved in, that this particular show would be my main focus right before we started to see the news about, Ahmaud Arbery, before Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and an election year. That was the biggest thing. We knew going to 2020, we would be heavily involved. Actually, one of the components of the show was actually helping to educate people about voting rights. And I think that watching everything from March till the election, it just showed why our show needed to be in the forefront in front of as many people as possible. And I think what was so unique and so amazing to see was how there was unity created within this time period for people to complete a goal. The same way that young people felt like, they were tired of seeing their parents mistreated, but their parents didn't necessarily have that many options, and knowing that young people decided to say, we're going to rally together and work with adults at the time to make sure that they saw something through. I feel like that's something that was happening today, and watching how many people in the midst of the pandemic were still willing to go out in the street and march and say enough is enough and want to hold people accountable for their actions. I think that I wish we didn't necessarily have to do that in today's world, because there's so much more progress that I personally felt like we should have had in today's world. But 1965 is not really far from today. Ruby Bridges is still alive. When you think about everything that she went through as a child, it's like, how much more do we have to continue to feel like we have to fight for something? But I think that idea of seeing how empowered young people feel, it is so great to see, because I think oftentimes by the time you get to a certain age, children are almost they're not almost children are taught that their opinions are not as important, and you're just supposed to wake up one day and adjust a paying bill, being miserable and pessimistic about the world around us, not realizing that even if you're in the midst of darkness, a peak of light will still allow you to see where you're going. And I think watching how, even to this day, how people are fighting or finding their voice, whether it be through podcasts, it could be through their Instagram, it could be through their Twitter page, or it could be through fashion, or whatever their gifts are. People are finding how to utilize it, and I think it's very special. I see moving forward a lot of people, institutions that will embed change. I don't think it'll be, a complete 180, but I do think that it'll at least plunge us forward in a way that my children one day won't have to think about marching for this same exact situation, or at least I would hope so. Hopefully not to this extent, but I'm hopeful that, seeing that connection, that we start to like move away from having to do so much to receive very basic foundational American rights.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'd love to hear what Mr. Hammond has to say about that as well, because I know a lot of times we often feel that way, that we hope that it doesn't happen in the next generation, but then it just seems like every generation has to have that kind of activism, and a lot of times it is youth-led. I remember that definitely my dad, who would have been born in the 40s and definitely part of that movement in the 60s, he would have been part of that same age as the folks that were doing the integration of Woolworths and things along that nature in Greensboro. So he would have been in that same age range. And then we saw people in my age range who were born in the 60s fighting against the Vietnam War and things along that line. And then we've seen other generations every time being youth-led, but it seems like it's always youth-led, but a continual thing that goes on every generation. So I would agree that we would hope to have some of these breaks and some of these changes, but sometimes the changes don't happen as fast as we would like, or they don't, or we don't feel that the people that get into leadership like Obama did enough. So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts and reflections on what I just said and some of how this play has shaped some of your views.
Well, I think one of the most important aspects of the play is, like you said, giving an example of how the youth get involved in a movement and hopefully empowering audiences who see the play about voting, because a lot of people take voting for granted. Unfortunately, I mean, I know people who just this past month didn't vote because they didn't like either one. And I'm like, well, is there ever going to be a perfect candidate? Is there ever not going to be something that you have to stand up for? But so hopefully by reminding audiences of what it took to get the vote, we will inspire them to cherish the vote and the value of the vote. But also just general empowerment for young people. I mean, all the horrible stuff that happened this year, with George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, and I was heartened by all of the people coming out to say this is enough. We've got to stop this. Not only, Black and white and Asians here in America, but across the globe, people came out to stand up against the violence perpetrated on people of color by the police. And so, if I was thinking, man, if we were doing this show now, we got to throw in some pictures of George Floyd at the end and throw in some, stuff in there to let people know that we have the right to vote, but we have not completed the struggle for equality in this country. And we have a long way to go to rid our society of the systemic racism that some people don't even tend to believe exists, or at least they claim not to believe it exists. So I'm excited for the show to continue, even in a year, although we have some very important votes coming up in Georgia. We have a very important vote going to be coming up in 2022 when we got to get some of that trash out of the Senate and Congress. So, and trash, that's my personal opinion. Some of you may like that, but we all got our own garbage. So, but I just think that it's still important to get out there and remind people of the importance of voting, remind people of the importance of being active and paying attention to what's going on in the world around you and using your voice, your feet, your signs, whatever, to underline the discrepancies in our society and make things change.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you on that, and definitely agree that you have to have that kind of voice always rising up and always being shared with everybody. I'd love to hear from all three of you some of the things that you found fascinating and that you learned that you were not expecting. But I also want to bring in my good new friend, Steve Rao, who is actually a council person out of Morrisville, to join in our conversation as well. And of course, he is, in my mind, a political activist and one that has been involved in technology and other things along that line. But he has got some Indian roots, so from India. So I'm going to bring Steve into the conversation as well. But while he comes in, I'd love to hear from all of y'all what some of your own thoughts are about some of the lessons that you have learned. So, Steve, glad that you can join us here in this conversation. As you can hear, they've got this great play about turning 15 and being part of the movement in the 60s. And I know that you've actually been involved in a number of youth-led things, even when you were a youth, whether it's been things going on in your own family or whether it's going on with your own kids, because you've got a college-age kid in school now. So I'd love to hear you talk about how important activism has been in your own life, as well as I'd love to hear first from the talent and everything from those involved in the play, something that they learned that they were not expecting to learn. So I'll go with the young lady first. So Kwade, what's something that you learned that you were not expecting to learn when you were doing this research about the play?
Oof, that's a big question. I think the biggest lesson that I learned, because I have a lot of thoughts about many things, and I have evolved from expressing said thoughts versus keeping them to myself. And I think the biggest lesson I learned from the show is understanding the importance of how to formulate what needs to be said and speaking to the right people about it. And I think that even looking at how having emotional control and how much strength it takes, thinking about Linda's first time in jail and really thinking about that as a 13-year-old, like what does that mean? How do you sustain during that time? How do you actually plunge forward and stay determined when things just a bit rough? I think that idea of knowing how her purpose was her complete focus. Nothing was going to deter from her seeing the outcome. And I think I learned that speaking up in a manner that demands for people to listen to you is the best way to not only expect change, but to make sure that you are committed to seeing the outcome. I'd pick anything that I learned from that time.
Well, what about you, Mr. Hyman? What are some of the lessons that you learned? You've been involved in theater for a while, so what are some of the things that you learned that maybe you weren't expecting to learn when you got involved in this production and some of the other productions you've done, like Fences?
Well, with this production in particular, I was surprised to find out that music was the fuel for the engine of the movement. And it inspired people, it lifted them up, it made them connect with each other. And then to make the connection from the music and the movement to the music and the songs that were created during the period of enslavement of Black people, and going all the way back to Africa and seeing how music has moved through our entire culture, and seeing the people celebrating the last election with all their music that they were singing, even that you about to lose your job. I love that, pick up that little thing. I was like, okay, here we go. So yeah, that was something that I had heard the music all along, but I was surprised to see how important it was to the whole movement and how that continues on today.
Well, what about you, Miranda? What was something that you learned that you were not expecting? You've been involved with this production for pretty much since its inception. So what is something that you were really surprised as you were doing all of this research?
Well, I've learned a lot about a lot of things in the course of this. And I guess the thing that stands out for me right now is the power of community. When I started working on this show, I thought, oh, Linda Blackman's story is so powerful. I want her story to get out there. I want to be part of helping to bring about change and all of that. But as I got more deeply involved in this project, I've really come to understand that each person must stand up and express their beliefs, but we really can't accomplish anything by ourselves. It's really about the power of the unity of the community. As Linda would say, let's put the unity back in the word community. And it's also, I'm interested in Councilmember Rao because a big part of what was accomplished by the Voting Rights Act in 1965 was bringing people of color into office at all levels of government, which was really impossible before that. And that has a huge effect because, again, as Linda would say, people who care about people like me, even people of goodwill who don't come from the community can't really understand the needs of the community in the same way that having truly diverse representation allows. So I think this little show keeps refusing to die because it has a job to do out here in the world. And it's about Kwiate and for Caswell and Linda and the people telling the story on the stage, moving people. Audiences always cry when they watch the show. But it's the power of theater to move people, not just hit them in the head, but hit them in the heart also.
Right.
And
And you mentioned
the community around a shared experience.
Right. And you mentioned community, and definitely I want to bring Steve Rao into the conversation, Councilman Rao. Miranda talked about how there is now this whole movement of getting more folks of different color and different orientations and everything else involved in various councils and all of that. So if you could share a little bit with our audiences, what got you involved in the political front and why you became involved, because as best I can tell, you've been a community activist here in Morrisville for a number of years. So I would love to hear what got you to go into the political front. And then as a side question, I'd love to hear you share your thoughts on just theater and arts as a means to get these messages out, because I definitely think that you've probably also been inspired by some art productions, even if you haven't seen this one yet. But I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on community and involvement.
Well, absolutely. And it's a pleasure to be with Miranda for Coswell and Kayade. I love those names, by the way. I feel like writing a short story with some fictional characters. I'm feeling very creative today. And if I'm slow, sometimes my Wi-Fi is a little weird out here, so just keep with me. But first of all, my story was that I'm the longest serving Indian American in North Carolina. I was elected in 2011. And, I'll never forget when my father-in-law, who died 2 years ago, was a U.S. Air Force colonel, retired, immigrants from India who served along my mother-in-law, who's still alive in Morrisville. And, I remember winning that historic election, and I felt, he and my dad embraced me. Sorry, I'm getting a little emotional. And I remember I felt the warmth of a tear from my father-in-law. And I said, I never seen you cry before. You didn't even cry when I married your daughter. And he said, well, he actually did cry, but he said, I wasn't crying because you won an election. It's one small step for you or your family, but it's a big leap forward for our community. And as I look now, 10 years later, literally a decade later, that was 10 years ago on November. I look at North Carolina very different, with more elected officials of Asian influence. And we have the Senate Minority Whip, Jay Chaudhary, one of my best friends who swore me in for my third term. We've got Dimple Ajmera in Charlotte, my colleague Satish Garamella, who came from Mumbai and is now in office, and Ya Lu from China. And we have many, many more now that Kamala Harris is the vice president-elect. I'm getting a lot of Asian Americans and young leaders wanting to know about, they want to be president. They want to be, and that's also another. So I think, to answer your question, that was my story. The reason I ran was I had run for county commissioner in 2010, lost a close race to the chairman, Tony Gurley, by 2%. I was taking down my yard signs, and I vowed to myself I would never run for office again. And then about 2 weeks later, Tom Murray, a Republican in the General Assembly, called me and said, Steve, you ought to run for my seat. I want a seat in the legislature. I was actually thinking of getting my dad to run. And he didn't want to do it. And then I ended up jumping in and winning. And now I'm really glad I did, because there was a door open, and I've been able to serve in a number of capacities, hoping I can eventually continue this journey. But I got to be honest with you, I feel like I'll be proud just to know that I was that first one, and that there's many others to join. And my great grandfather was a Speaker of the House in Tamil Nadu in India, and he left to join Gandhi's civil disobedience movement. So I wish I could go back in a time machine and go back and talk to my great grandfather about what that revolution was like. And, I think that, the passion to change your communities, that's really the main reason why I ran. And I try to make it about that, which is harder in the gladiator sport of politics today, where it's a full contact sport, and you got to dress up and get ready to battle, but it shouldn't be that way. And I'm hoping that we can set a good example for our children. I hope I answered your question.
You did. I wanted to find out if you had any theater background, but we can get to that later. But one of the things you just raised, and I'd love to hear from everybody on the panel, this and everything, is what do you think folks would think now they were involved in the movement? People like Martin Luther King, people like Malcolm X, people like that could go on and name many of them that have passed on, people like the Black Panthers that have passed away and everything now. And of course, there are still some living Black Panther members. But what do you think they would think about what's going on in the world now? And also, what do you think is the general view of the public and everybody else about that historical election? So I'd love to hear everybody's perception. I heard Mr. Hyman giving that rah-rah, so I'll turn it over to him first and then come to Kuyate as well. But what do you think that they would think about of the fact of Kamala being the first female vice president, as well as some of the negative things that have gone on with Trump's election and everything that happened with the right-wing side of politics?
I think a lot of them would look at this and go, been there, done that. I mean, it seems like this divisiveness just keeps coming around again and again. I was watching a documentary last night about Ronald Reagan, and it was talking about Barry Goldwater and how he sparked the whole conservative movement because they wanted government out of business, and they did not want the civil rights movement to succeed. And that's where, Reagan cut his teeth. And as we go along, with the division in this country from people who to this day, are still fighting against civil rights, and for billionaires who have no interest in their communities or their lives, So I think that, those guys that come back, they would be like, still, y'all doing this still? And we say, yep, we plugging along. We're moving by small increments. We have Barack Obama. Everybody who had any sense knew that wasn't going to make a post-racial society. We knew that because now we went through the backlash against that. And now we have Kamala, who is going to be our vice president and hopefully the next president after that. I sadly think that they would just like roll their eyes and go, oh Lord, and then jump in and help.
Yep, I think you're right. From a youth perspective, what do you think, Koyata? What do you think these historical figures?
What?
Sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, but you weren't. I thought you were done. My fault.
Oh, I was joking about being from a youth perspective.
Oh. But Koyata, what would you think about?
Watching this election and watching more specifically Kamala's win, or Madam Vice President-elect Harris win, was important for so many reasons. She is a Black woman. She's an Asian woman. She's an HBCU grad, and she's also a soror of the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. All of those elements are wonderful, and I was brought to tears watching her win because she could win because Shirley Chisholm came before her. And I think just knowing that there was a path laid out for her to even think that was a possibility, for her to say that had the audacity to join the ticket of a President-elect Biden. I think that that's very phenomenal. In regards to how civil rights activists of the 60s would feel today, I think that they would give her props and be proud of the fact that, this is a victory won. And I think you can pick apart things that you don't necessarily like about a politician. I don't think any human being will really agree 100% or even 85% with politicians because it's a very sticky lane. There's so many nuances to it. But it can't take away from the fact that, I think knowing where Black people have come from in this society, they would celebrate the fact that they can't see her. And many have spoken out and said that they are proud of her because there are many, Black actors who are around who were able to see Barack Obama win as well as seeing Madam Vice President-elect Harris win. Now, what would they say in terms of like the marches and the riot? I personally think that there would be more of an emphasis to educate Black and brown communities on their financial responsibility to build wealth. I think now that from like on the surface level, from like who we see in terms of Black celebrity or Black entrepreneurs, there's this new rise, especially with Black women being not only the most educated group in the United States, but also the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs. Coming into a certain amount of money, we have a responsibility now to maintain that so that it's kept for generations to come. So I think that they would want us young people to be aware of how to not only make money, but maintain it so that we'll have access to providing a proper access to education and housing and making sure that we are set up for success just as our non-Black and brown counterparts are. I think that that's how they would view it, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I've heard that. Actually, I heard a little bit of that during the business leadership conference because there was a lot of conversation about the fact of having these folks that have made significant amounts of money and how are they actually mobilizing what they have in a true sense. We did see a lot of the athletes and even some of the entertainers doing that, using their platform in order to get the message out, whether that was LeBron James, whether that was some of the other NBA, WNBA, and NFL players. But there's still a feeling that maybe they're not doing enough. And then one of the perspectives that was put out was that sometimes we don't know what they're doing behind the scenes or what they're doing that we don't know about, but that there is room for them to do more. So that's some of the conversation that I did hear going on this past week within that business leadership conference. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out. But Miranda, one of the things that I'm oftentimes fascinated by is the fact that too often we don't know enough about our historical figures. And you said that this was about the foot soldiers. And I would argue that there's even some of the main role people that we don't know enough about. I'm here in Durham, and of course we have the Pauli Murray House. So people are now starting to learn who Pauli Murray was. But a lot of people throughout history have no idea who this amazing civil rights person was. There was actually one of the original writers of Brown versus Board of Education. But a lot of people don't understand that part of our history and everything along those lines. So when you think of these foot soldiers that you and your team were doing the research on, these young folks that were 15, 14, and other ages at that time, who were some of these foot soldiers that we need to know more about that we're not knowing about? I've heard you reference like 2 or 3, but who are some of the other foot soldiers that we should probably know about, but we don't? And also one of the questions I have for all of you, including Councilman Rao, is do you feel we're getting enough of this in our school system? Because I personally feel that we need to have more of this kind of lessons going on in our school system, and I don't see enough of it happening. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Ms. Berry, and then I'll come to Mr. Hyman as well, and Councilman Rao, and of course, my new friend, Fuyade.
Well, that's a lot, Mark. I want to say one thing back to the question that everyone else was speaking to. At talking about Dr. King, the speech that he made at Montgomery at the end of this march, I happened to look into it doing research for the show. And it's known as the how long, not long speech. You probably remember hearing that refrain. Right. But a major theme of this speech was that the white power structure of the wealthy people in the South had created this division between poor white people and poor black people in order to keep labor cheap. That white working class people were starving. They but at least they weren't black.
Mm.
And black people were simply kept out of government in order to prevent, in order to keep those white people in their place. And I think that the legacy of that division is front and center in our faces right now. And that this is one of the things that we really need to look at and understand how our country is now divided in half between people who see Kamala Harris as the face of America. She's an immigrant, she's African American, she grew up through public schools in Oakland, California, and she became, she was the first of her gender or her background to get all kinds of jobs. But this is what America looks like now. And we have got to stop permitting this division that is caused by economics and also by politics and history.
Yeah.
So that's sorry, I got on my soapbox, but
No, no problem. We like soapbox here.
that speech is, if you Google Martin Luther King's speech in Montgomery, it'll blow you away. I was not familiar with that speech before,
Wow.
and it's so timely now.
What are your thoughts, Mr. Hammond, about where we are in terms of education and even some of what Miss Berry said and everything? But I do feel that we need to do more of this teaching of our history within the education system. I feel we're not doing enough of that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Oh, I totally agree. It wasn't until very recently that they started teaching about 1898 in North Carolina, in Wilmington. About almost 10 years ago, I took a African-American literature class at UCLA, and I read a book called The Marrow of Tradition by Charles Chestnut. And it's a fictionalized version of the coup in 1898. And I, looked it up, and then I called my niece who was living here in Pender County, and I was like, "Did you learn about this in school?" She said, "No." I went to a performance about this issue, and there were all these college kids there from UNCW, and they hadn't learned about it. So there are things that are purposefully kept out of the education system or whitewashed. Waddell, who was one of the people who led the coup, became the mayor, took over the mayor's role. And he was in the history books as a hero until recently. And then we have states like Texas, who was trying to rewrite history by demanding that certain things be taken out of history books because it might make white children feel bad, if the truth is on the page about slavery and things like that. And because Texas orders so many books, these companies will acquiesce to them and will try to water down history. And so, I think it's criminal that we're not teaching children the truth, that we're not exposing them to, because unless you face a problem, you can never fix a problem. So, this is something that makes me really angry. And my daughter, I have a daughter, she just started high school. She's in 9th grade. And she likes to come home and teach us what she learned. And I'm always trying to dig deeper with her, saying, okay, that's what they taught you. Okay, let's go a little bit deeper and find out some of the underlying things that they might not have had time or the inclination to teach you about in school, because I'm going to make sure my girl understands. And I don't think, I feel it's unfortunate that we have to do this, especially here in North Carolina, the way, the war between the states, or some, the kind of ways that they would express what happened in the Civil War and the reasons for states' rights and stuff like that, instead of looking at the real issues that we were fighting about. So, that's something that gets my temperature up.
No, I definitely agree with you. Love to hear from Congressman Rao about that as well, because I definitely feel that we don't hear enough of our history in general. Like I said, you're one of the first elected people of Indian descent here and everything. And a lot of folks don't know about that. And a lot of folks don't know about the history of both Indians from India, as well as like our own Native American population that exists right here in this area. We don't see enough of that in our history books or some of our Asian and other Latin American narratives. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about what we can do to actually do better about improving our education system and getting these kind of voices heard, like what this play is doing.
Okay, great. Thank you. And he just promoted me to congressman, so maybe I'll be serving the nation. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to go tell my mother tonight that I just got called to be a congressman, and she'll put me in my place. She can't believe I'm the one son that became a politician. She always says I'm her George W. Bush, but that's a conversation for another time. It wasn't supposed to be me. It was supposed to be the younger one. But first of all, let me just say that I want to wish everyone a happy Diwali, which is an Indian New Year. And Diwali is the message I want to share before I answer your question, Mark, is that it's a celebration of light over darkness, hope over despair. And if you go around Morrisville today or Cary or anywhere around the state, you'll see candles and fireworks. But it's not the burning or the candle that is actually the significance. Really, the significance is of this light, divine light that exists within each of us. And that our light isn't dependent or shouldn't be dependent on the outside world, the darkness and division that we see. And I think that's one of the biggest problems is that you turn the news on, it's negative, negative, negative. People are using Twitter and social media, and we're not finding our direction from the real GPS that matters, the heart. And I think these leaders that we've all talked about, like Gandhi, King, Mandela, Thurgood Marshall, Rosa Parks, literally ordinary citizens who did extraordinary things, but we often forget. I think that's what they would speak to our children. If I could go back in a time machine and bring all these leaders back, or develop some artificial intelligence technology, and believe it or not, there are some technologies where you can do that, and he could speak to our children. I think what Dr. King and what Gandhi and all of them would say is that their causes were not popular at the time. It's almost like the Star Wars series when, they look back in that last Star Wars movie and they look at Han Solo and said, is that really true? Was Luke Skywalker really true, or was he just fiction? And Han Solo, he's much older, he goes, absolutely, all of it was true, right? And I think the thing about it is that they were leaders who inspired that spark around them, but they communicated with people and they spoke to their heart. And I think that's what they would remind is that, do something like John Lewis said, get in a little bit of necessary trouble if you have to. And that's what we have to keep doing. So happy Diwali. But to answer your question, I think that absolutely we need to bring different perspectives. We have almost every nation in the world in Morrisville, 40% Indian, Vietnamese, Korean, Chinese. We actually historically were a black town, a black African-American town. And the first freed slaves worshipped at a church named Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church. And they sing the same hymns there in that church that they did in the 1800s. And some of the last battles of the Civil War were fought not a few miles from where I'm speaking to you today. And so we have to bring their perspectives because they're immigrants. Many of them are in technology. They're working harder. They're working smarter, just like Alexander Hamilton. They're building up our economy. Some of them are dreamers that are here through no fault of their own, but even they're producing to the economy. But also the most important thing that I would say, Mark, is that we have to get those communities understanding that Black Lives Matter and connecting with the Black community is also important. That, at the end of the day, we're all people of color living here, and that we're not going to be able to honor the vision of our country unless we all come together. And so there's a tendency sometimes to say, well, I'm going to go to Diwali is an Indian event. I'm going to go there to the temple. And then I'm going to go to the MLK celebration if I'm, that's a black holiday. I'm just generalizing here. And then I'm going to go to this. And what I'm saying is that it's got to be everybody together so that Indian Americans should come to MLK because the very principles that Gandhi had made it to a young Martin Luther King. And the same practices that he used to leverage the civil rights movement were based on a man in India who literally, with 5 people beside him, liberated India from the British Empire. Right? same movement, right? We've got to cross-pollinate to make sure that we are all one. And this is something I'm trying to work on as a leader, because I think it's so easy to do our own thing, listen to the next tweet, listen to the next show. Sorry I went over my time, but the answer to your question is an unequivocally absolute yes, that we have to bring these perspectives into the body politics of America, so that whatever policies, and we have to have conversations with people that we're not comfortable having conversations with. I was running, I'll end with this just to show you the idea of racial bias. I was running one day in Morrisville, and a man stopped me, upset about multifamily development that we were approving in Morrisville. And in my conversation, he didn't mean to be insulting, but it came out. He said, Steve, I don't want to have affordable housing and apartments, because if we do that, we're going to get a lot of blacks moving into Morrisville, and then the crime is going to go up. I think for a minute he forgot he was speaking to an Indian American. There was a moment of silence. I was upset. I didn't say anything. But I'm going to call him over the holidays, and I'm going to sit down with him. I'm going to have a very uncomfortable conversation with him, because this is somebody that I would never expect that to come. But you know what? It's in his heart. He's had some experience or some bias that's been ingrained in him because of what he's seen and heard and read, which is simply untrue, right? I mean, yeah, more African-American men are in prison than any demographic, but that doesn't mean that every Black American is going to lean towards crime. You see what I'm saying? So this is the problem that we're having. Racial bias is also intertwined. So I went over I had to get that in there. Sorry.
No problem at all. One of the things I was going to ask Miranda and everything is, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this, is art as a form of activism, because I'm a big fan of art as a tool of activism. And I know that here in Durham, we've got a person that actually is sitting on our city council who's been very involved in arts activism, that being the gentleman, Pierce Freelon, who is his dad was Phil Freelon, the great architect and everything, who passed away not that long ago. But Pierce has done a lot with his rap music and with hip hop and a number of other things, teaching young people that are about Quixote's age about sound and things along those lines. We've got some spoken word poets that are doing activism, folks like Dasana Hanu and a bunch of others. But I do see art as a tool within the activism belt. And actually, even Mr. Hyman earlier referenced that back in the 60s, there were a lot of musicians that were getting their message out through their music, but also using it as a tool of activism. I mean, we all know that great song that was made very famous, Strange Fruit, which is definitely a classic about activism. So definitely, I'd love to hear your thoughts on art as a tool within the activism tool belt.
Well, I think the thing about art is that people bring themselves, their whole selves, to the experience of art. And we have had an opportunity to perform Turning 15 on the Road to Freedom to student audiences in schools or at performing arts centers where they bring students from schools to come and see the show. And these kids are not there because they want to learn about activism. They're there because they got on a school bus and it took them to this building and now they're there. And what happens when they're in the theater is that they open their hearts and minds to this young girl played by Quixote, who's just a kid like them, who says, I was born in 1950 in Selma, Alabama, and I was in jail 9 times before my 15th birthday. And they go, what? And from that moment, they're open to the experience of learning. Yes, it's a piece of history, but it's a human story and about a community of young people who stood up for something that they felt was to get the right to vote for their parents. I mean, it wasn't even directly for them at the time. They were getting beaten up and going to jail so that their parents could vote. And I think there was a kid who came to one show who said, I didn't know where I was going today. He was an 8th grader. And he said, but I have to say, I learned more from this play than any book I could possibly have read.
Wow.
And I think it's because he was crying at the time when he said that. The point is that the arts open your heart and your mind and make you think about things and maybe expose you to things that you wouldn't choose to be exposed to on your own.
Absolutely.
No doubt about that. And
And
Councilmember
oh, sorry.
Rao was teasing me about promoting him to congressman and everything along those lines. And along those same lines, I kind of made Coyote an activist without actually asking her if she considers herself an activist. Because I definitely consider a lot of artists to be activists, but you may not consider yourself an activist in your own right. So, do you consider yourself an artist and an activist, or you just consider yourself an artist and a talent? Coyote?
I feel like I think that as an artist, if you know what you're talking about and you're moving with purpose, you end up being an activist. But I think using the label activist can feel very daunting. I know it's taken me a while to even say it because I know the responsibility that comes with it. Funny enough, to get back off of Miranda's point, so I teach piano and voice lessons outside of my life as an actor. It's a passion of mine because I feel like an educated mind can make informed decisions. And I had a young student, and I want to say she's half Indian and half Vietnamese. And we have a document of what we're doing because all of my lessons are virtual. And she's like, she came to me the other day during her lesson. She said, I want to learn this all, lift every voice and thing. So, of course, my entire mind was living. I was like, how do you know this song? She said, well, my music director is teaching it to us in school. She goes to a majority white private school. I'm pretty sure in her class, she's probably like maybe like one of a small group of non-white students. And to me, that made me so excited because that's a song that I've known since I was in kindergarten. It was a requirement. I went to a majority Black Catholic school in Philadelphia, and for our kindergarten graduation, we had to memorize "Lift Every Voice and Sing" as well as "Elaborate by Maya Angelou." So for her to learn this song in a majority white private school, to me, that meant a lot, which meant that I can now. That's the power of music. That's the power of art, and I think that forever now she understands the purpose of that song. She will go forth in life with a different perspective, and that's I think what is scary to most people about music. It's so catchy, and you can swiftly say so much, and that's why I like being an artist because I get to say whatever I want. Actually, of course, but I get to say and I get to actually provide elements of truth that forces people to think as they navigate throughout the world. So I would definitely say I'm an artist and activist, and that's the whole purpose of being an artist. It's knowing that you have something to say that might go against the grain, but saying it anyway because you know that within your lifetime, more often than the latter, when you're not necessarily around, where people can appreciate what you had to say because you chose authenticity and honesty over trendy.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Mr. Hyman and everything, I'd love to hear your thoughts on art and activism. I know that for ever since it pretty much started, I would go down to the National Black Theater Festival, which is in Winston-Salem, and I would see a lot of what I consider both artists and activists. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on one, art as it plays a role in activism, and also if you think we're doing a good enough job of even teaching the arts in our school system, because I would argue that that's something that we've kind of lost track of and that we're not seeing enough of, whether that's music, whether that's theater, whether that's even basic poetry. But I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Whoa, that's big. I think that the arts do play an amazing role in activism and in educating people. Like you mentioned before, Strange Fruit, Billie Holiday's song.
Right.
I think back to in the 60s when I became Black because of James Brown. I wasn't a Negro. I wasn't colored anymore. I had to say it loud. I'm Black and I'm brown, you know? And then we looked at Public Enemy and Fight the Power. And I actually watched Do the Right Thing Again a couple weeks ago for the first time since it came out in '89. And it was like hit me in the chest like a fist that this movie is still so relevant today. We still have the same divisions today, and that movie is something that inspires people. I look at artists like Carl Walker, and the cutouts that she does that are just, stunning. And look at Kahindi Wiley. I was so happy that I happened to be in New York when his statue was in Times Square. He had the statue of the black man with dreads and a hoodie on a horse and one of these historic poses. And I got to, stand there and look at it and be inspired by his work. So I do believe that art is a powerful tool for educating people, for inspiring people, maybe even for inciting people to do things. I do think that arts have been erased from public schools for the most part, which is heartbreaking, because if it wasn't for public schools, I wouldn't be, an artist, an actor, a writer, because of, we did a couple of shows a year, and all that is gone now. It also, I also feel, though, that even in higher institutions of learning where they do have arts programs, it's very Eurocentric. And so, the young Black people that get into these programs, or Indian people or Latinos that get into these programs, are playing all these European roles and learning all these European techniques. And they don't maybe once a year get to explore something that has a connection to their heritage. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed, because schools, like Juilliard, I imagine, are very classic centered, what they consider classics, but there are other things that are classics too. So yeah, that's a bit disappointing. And I think that the more we encourage and support artists of all races and nationalities, the more we cross over, go see some films that are made in India, go see some films that are made in China. Don't be afraid of subtitles. Oh my God. That the more we can become unified and understand each other. So yeah, that's my take.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I know that both you and Quayade have to get ready to get prepared for y'all's production. So I'm here to let both of y'all go. I think me and Steve and Miranda will stick around for at least a little bit longer. But Quayade, I guess one of the questions I ask you before you get ready to depart, and I'll ask you first, and then I'll come to Mr. Hyman as well, is what is a reason that folks that are watching globally should come and try to attend this virtual production that y'all are doing in your mind? So share your reasons that they should come to the production. And also, if you could, I'd love to hear maybe one of your favorite historical plays or a work of art that deals with history. Be that, there have been plays about Martin Luther King, there's been plays about Malcolm X, but what is something other than this play that you're in that is something that you are inspired by and that you like to think of when you think of these kind of plays that talk about history, or any kind of work of art that talks about history?
Okay. First, you should definitely watch the show and tune in, because if you are a young person, then I think that you'll be heavily inspired by seeing how Linda fearlessly and also with fear worked through those feelings and decided to fight for what she felt was right. And despite what her experiences were growing up, despite what she experienced with her siblings and with her father and her family, she still found the courage in her heart to say, enough is enough, and I'm going to join this movement to do what I think is right. And I said, that's phenomenal. If you are an adult, I think that this is a great time for you to see how important it is to speak life into your children and to let them know that their mind is a powerful tool and that they do have so and create an environment that they would like to live in and experience as they grow older. I think it's a great way to figure out how to have conversation amongst our seniors of the world and young people. And there are also fun parts. There's lots of singing involved. If you're someone who loves sound and a great sound, then you definitely in for a great entertainment piece. So definitely check it out for those reasons. I think those are the most important reasons for me. You'll laugh, you'll cry, you'll be inspired, all those wonderful things. If I had to pick another work outside turning 15 that speaks about this,
Yes.
if I had, there are multiple, but I would say just in relationship to the arts. There's actually a book I picked up, but funny enough, I have it in front of me. And it's called Black Broadway. And it's actually written by Stuart F. Lane and compilation of contributions of Black people within the art space. And I think that is super, super important for Black performers, young, old, and all in between, for them to read this book, because you have powerhouses from way back in 1800s, 1700s being listed up until today. And I think it's important to put a name to faces that almost seem forgotten when you're going through school, and it's even difficult to find it on the internet. But I mean, the internet is only as smart as the person using it. So I think that if you have the ability to purchase the book, it's Black Broadway by Stuart F. Lane, and that actually become a favorite of mine, because I feel for the first time in my entire artist career, I'm finally learning about artists, Black artists contributing to the theater space.
Sounds great. Definitely glad to hear you give those great advices and great reasons to see both Turning 15 as well as that other book that you referenced and everything. And I hate to tell you this, Councilman Steve Rao, but I think you may have somebody that could have your job, because she's a very eloquent speaker and everything else. So if she decides to run for political office, no matter where she's at, I think she could do it. And I know last week on one of our shows here on IBM TV, I had the pleasure of interviewing Rain Pryor, who also comes out of the acting world and ran for Baltimore City Council. She actually lost her seat, but she did run. So we do know that folks out of the acting world can get into positions of being involved in the political world as well. So I think she might be coming to take your job. Just letting you know that if she might move to Morrisville and take your job. So just warning you. But I greatly appreciate you being involved and for joining us, Kweata. Definitely, I thought that you gave some great perspective and all of that. So just wanted to share that. Steve, you got any thought about the fact of I'm trying to give her your job? You said I made you a congressman, but I'm trying to give her.
Well, first of all, Ronald Reagan was an actor and a radio guy, So and then Jennifer Garner. I grew up with her in West Virginia in Charleston. She's a famous actress. Sam Trammell from True Blood and Homeland. He grew up playing basketball and soccer with them. So acting, you never know. I mean, don't ask, but don't wish what you ask for. I mean, it can happen, right? Just don't. Hey, it's fine. Run. I think she'd be great. I mean, I think term limits for all. I think everyone should be given term limits.
That makes sense.
Flat across the board,
Definitely.
right? Force me to do something else.
Well, I appreciate.
Maybe I'll just be. Yeah. Thank you.
Appreciate you, Kweata. You were a great conversation. Before I'm gonna let you go and everything, but before I let everybody go, I also need to hear from. Phil, I think Francois has also got to get ready to go to his acting and get ready for the production as well. So I want to hear his thoughts and get some comments from him about what's going on in the sense of we've talked about arts and activism, but definitely if you can give a reason that folks should come to see the production from your mindset, as well as maybe a book or some work of art that you would like folks to check out as well.
Well, I think one of the most stunning parts of our show is the music. And we used 95% of the music is from the civil rights movement. And it's all done a cappella. And it's stunning. The voices of these young actors are stunning. And we also have a song by Joshua Campbell, who was just nominated for an Oscar for original song from the movie Harriet. And the song that he did for our play, and he was also our music director, is amazing and so moving. So yeah, come for the story, come for the music, because it's going to go directly like one of those shots that they put in your heart to bring you back to life. That's what the music does. If I had to mention a play, I was trying to think of that while Kweata was talking, and I remember the last play, one of the plays I saw where at the end I was just like, whoa, I was like stunned by the impact, and that's a play called Clybourne Park.
Mm.
And I quickly Googled it because I wanted to get the name of the author. It's Bruce Norris, and it's a spinoff of Lorraine Hansberry's A Raisin in the Sun, and it was a stunning play, and it had a huge effect on me. And there are so many other plays that are out there, like on Broadway this year. There's Slave Play, which I saw before it moved to Broadway, and that's another punch in the gut piece of theater that I think people should pay attention to and go see. Of course, Hamilton, and those plays too. But yeah, that's what I say, and I'll stand by it.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you. I appreciate you staying by it and all of that. And I can definitely say that Hamilton is a powerful piece. I saw a group of young kids do some excerpts from it. I believe that was in the latter part of last year, or the latter part of last year, or the early part of this year. But they were just truly amazing. And they went on and did that same production up at the Apollo in New York. They were actually part of a show called The Road to the Apollo, which picks winners from throughout, and then they go and get a chance to perform at the real Apollo. So definitely I saw them do that. And I think they were out of Wilson, North Carolina, in that general area. So definitely it was great seeing that production and all. So glad that you were able to join us here and everything. And I'm also a big fan sometimes of us thinking outside the box. I know I was talking to a friend of mine that was doing one of these similar kind of shows on a different network, and he was talking about the folks with Fiddler on the Roof. And apparently they had a very tight rule about you had to do the Fiddler, and you've always had to do the Fiddler under tight restrictions. Like it has to be the same set, the same this, and all the rules are put very tightly in place. And I was saying that as we go into this new age of theater and folks thinking out the box, maybe we need to have an African American version of Fiddler on the Roof. So they said that was something that nobody has done, but that maybe that's an idea that we can have created and everything. So an African American version of Fiddler on the Roof. So I have to get with you, Mr. Hyman and Miss Miriam. Maybe we can create that.
Sounds great.
Thank you for having me on your show, Mr. Lee. I appreciate that. Mr. Rao, it's nice to meet you, man. And since we three are in North Carolina, maybe we brothers should hook up someday and have lunch and have some coffee and rage.
Absolutely, would love to do that. So I'll reach out to Mark and get all your information. Okay.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
definitely.
Yeah, I appreciate that. All right.
Peace.
I gotta go pick up the dog.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Miranda. Bye, y'all.
Yeah. Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Well, Mark,
Well, it's just the three of us now, and I know that I've still got a few more minutes, but if you got to bounce too, Steve, I definitely understand that. But in the meantime, I was going to say that I would love to hear everybody's thoughts about something that you're very passionate about, which is technology. So I'd love to hear you share a little bit about what's going on in technology in the world, Steve. And then after you explain a little bit about that, I'm sure Miranda may have some thoughts on what you're doing in that field and in the field of immigration, because I know that those are two of your passion projects that you're involved in, Councilman Rao.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think with technology, I think the biggest thing going on right now at the national level is we'll be seeing how President-elect Biden deals with it, but breaking up big tech. So Facebook, Google, the big technology giants, I think to stimulate entrepreneurship and innovation, maybe a breakup of those. So that's something that the U.S. Senate and Congress will be looking at in the new session. I think it's important to understand, as my West Virginia friend John Chambers reminded me, all of us a few months ago when he hosted our startup summit, is that the one thing that we haven't heard a lot about, because everything COVID's been the elephant in the room, is the fact that 40% of many, many jobs in the next decade are going to be automated away. And that's because of technology. But we have an opportunity to create new jobs in these areas. And Chambers defined it as disruption. So, artificial intelligence, robotic process automation, sensors and smart cities. These are all areas where they're going to need people with the skills. And many of these jobs don't exist today. So I think that places a great opportunity for United States of America, and particularly North Carolina, where we are, to have community colleges upskill and train workers that have been displaced, to make sure that we're investing in not only the urban areas, but the rural areas, to make sure that we're offering disenfranchised communities, Black communities, minority communities, the opportunity to get the same level of training. Because I think when we say smart cities in usually it's a big event at the convention center. You think of a technology guy with an NC State hat, having a good microbrew, and that's sort of the image and face of technology. So that's what the work I'm doing is how do we bring that to fruition? And then the final thing I would say in terms of, because I know Miranda has to leave, is immigration. And the main thing I'll say there is that this is something that the president-elect will have to deal with. And, DACA, they just struck down some of the Trump limitations on the Dreamers, so they get to still stay here for now. We have many legal immigrants that are producing about $20 billion to our economy nationally, many from India. They're at our universities, are providing technology jobs, things like that. And then we've got to deal with an immigration system that is streamlined so that many of the great entrepreneurs, we forget, came from other parts of the world. So we wouldn't have Zoom, we wouldn't have a SpaceX, if it hadn't been for Elon Musk coming on an H-1B, we wouldn't have Yahoo, we wouldn't have many of these companies. So that's going to be the greatest thing for America to deal with. And President Biden is going to have to deal with it, is how to have an immigration system that keeps our economy competitive, so that we are getting that talent and filling it for the jobs of the future. And we want those jobs in the U.S. So that's at a really high level sort of my answer to your two questions. I want to give Miranda respectfully some time.
Yeah, and I definitely want to give Miranda some time, and then we'll explore a little bit more as we wrap up in the last 10 or 15 minutes. But one of the things I was going to ask you, Miranda, is if you could, and it's the same question I asked your two folks that are involved in your production. And by the way, it's been running across and the banner across so that folks can see it and everything, so they can hopefully click on that website and learn more about this powerful production. Is the question I asked them is why folks should come to see the production. I know you've been alluding to that all during this interview, but if you wanted to capsulize that question, as well as what kind of history book that deals with art and activism that you would also recommend. And then the last question that I'll ask as you get ready to walk out the door is what kind of message of hope and hope that you would want to give to the whole community of the world, because this is a global platform, IBM TV. So what kind of message of hope would you like to share with the world?
Wow. Okay. I get to do a little preaching.
Yes, you do.
First of all, why come to see Turning 15 on the Road to Freedom? Because it will inspire you. It will make you feel great. It will make you feel like it is possible to bring about change. It is possible to bring people together. It is possible to live up to the ideals of our country. And people have done it against great odds and brought about change. And as you said earlier on, Mark, unfortunately, each generation has to do this again. It would be so great if we could think, oh, well, it's over. We've done it now. We've won. But that isn't the case. Democracy cannot survive unless people vote. It turns into autocracy if people don't show up at the polls. So be inspired, feel good, feel like you're part of your community. That's what I would say about that. Gosh, in terms of other works of art, I definitely think the plays of August Wilson, coming to see Kaz in Fences was really so moving. There's a beautiful film of the play Fences. And if your audience isn't familiar with August Wilson's work, that is definitely worth looking up. I'm sure you can probably see it on Netflix or something. Right. And the last thing I wanted to say was I wanted to refer to what Steve was just saying a minute ago about how much immigrants contribute to our economy, how much African Americans have contributed to our economy since the day, 400 years ago when they were brought here in chains. This country would not be what it is if it hadn't been for the labor and also the belief of African Americans. I was just watching a documentary the other night talking about Black servicemen in the Second World War. And these people who were treated so terribly, nevertheless, went and fought for this country, went and fought to defeat fascism. And Indian Americans, there are so many, as Steve was saying, Yahoo, the technology industries. The technology industries are what is going to build. I said to somebody the other day, would you rather be the last guy working in a coal plant or the first guy working in a solar energy plant? You know that this new technology is the future. So why would you want to cling to old technology that is going to go away instead of moving into new technology. And that is the thing that the United States has had since the beginning, has been this influx of people from all over the world. Henry Ford was an immigrant. Andrew Carnegie was an immigrant. I think Thomas Edison was an immigrant. I mean, our history is just filled with people who came from other places and brought their belief in the possibility of a better future for themselves and their children, and their intelligence and their willingness to work hard. And that's who we are. We need to lean into being that kind of America.
No,
So
I definitely agree with you, and I definitely appreciate those very powerful words. And I think we definitely need to lean more into that and everything. And by the way, I'm just so glad that I met you those couple of few years ago and everything when you came into town, and we've definitely become friends. So I definitely appreciate you being here and look forward to doing more work with you. And when we get off of this whole virtual world, being able to get it to the platforms that we were hoping to bring it to, like North Carolina Central, like Duke, like a number of other places that I know we were starting to have conversations about, but unfortunately this whole COVID thing happened and those conversations had stopped. But I'm letting you know that whenever we get past this pandemic, I do hope to help you carry those conversations on so that we can bring this production here and folks can see the live performance. Because while the virtual performances are great, and me and Steve were actually having lunch earlier today and we were talking about this, while the virtual performances and the virtual conferences are great, it doesn't beat the same as being in person, because those in-person kind of things is where you get true connections. Yes, we can connect through the internet and through the wonders of the internet, but it doesn't have the same feel as being able to sit there and actually break bread, as the old expression goes, there in person and in place.
Well, I look forward to breaking bread with you. You've been a really great friend, and this is a wonderful show. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
No problem. I was glad to do that for sure. And I
Great
look forward
to meet
to
you.
definitely jumping on that conversation tomorrow and seeing the production. So I look forward to doing that tomorrow evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Miranda.
Take care.
All
Bye-bye.
right, take it easy. Bye. So I'll get her. There we go. So Steve, it's just me and you. We'll be wrapping up in the next 10 or 15 minutes, but I would love to hear you share a little bit. And you did a little bit of that with my theater friends and everything. But like I said, and I know you've been on some of our other shows, but a lot of folks that are watching my show don't necessarily know your history and all of that. So definitely share a little bit as to what got you involved in politics. And we never did get to the other question, which I'd asked earlier, which is, did you ever do any theater, or were you ever involved in the arts, any form or fashion, or any of your kids involved in the arts? Because that's one of the questions I had asked earlier that we never did get the answer to. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about being an artist of any sort. Maybe you sit there and write poems when you're not doing the world of technology and the world of political activism.
Well, I do. Well, first of all, I'm a former athlete. I was a top junior tennis player and won 2 state high school championships. Played in college, so I really wasn't an art at all. I mean, growing up, I was just studying tennis, and I guess the closest I get to art is I love to write a little bit and read a lot, and a lot. I have a different speaking style, so I do paint a lot of imagery into my speeches. So I work on that, and it's forced me to write. The greatest influence on my life in terms of the arts is my own son, the young man that's walking walking behind me. He doesn't know he's on TV, but hey, welcome to the. But he's been a tremendous influence on my life. My son Ryan is a great artist. He has actually started his own business. If you want to check out his art with Ryan, and he does a lot of portraits and he sells his art, and he also listens to music and likes to play. He could play like Bohemian Rhapsody, and we sing it together. And so he's had a big influence on our family, where we actually now are appreciating the arts more. And have actually we were going last year to the DPAC every week, every 2 weeks. My wife got tickets, all of us, and it was so great to go listen to the theater and to see the music. And I noticed it was such a great release to escape for a few hours with your family, get a good dinner. But then we watched all the great ones that year: Hamilton, Miss Saigon, My Dear Evan Hansen, Fiddler on the Roof, right? And what came out of that is we now listen to those songs. Sometimes I'll be on a run, I'll listen to a Hamilton song, we sing it here, we watch the Disney production, and to tie that art and music back into the real life, right? So I hope that answers your question. And we have Ryan here for 3 more years, but I'm very proud of his art, and hopefully I can have you meet him sometime.
Definitely, I would love to meet him. And you said he has a website or something that he's involved in. So, what is his website? And folks can hopefully learn about some of his artwork on that website if you remember what that is off the top of your head.
It's Art Ryan. Come here. It's Art with Ryan, Ryan. You can find him on Instagram, and it's you just type it in and you can find his art, and it's Rayan Ryan Rao, and
Right.
that's his art praise. And
Oh,
over the next few weeks, I'm going to be showcasing some of his art. I've been so busy this year with COVID, but he did some remarkable portraits of Obama in the past, Dr. King. He's got some others he's working on, and it's just wonderful to see him flourish and escape. He can sometimes just loves to be able to get away from everything and just paint and
oh
draw.
yeah, sometimes you just got to paint and get that painting vibe going and everything. We had talked earlier with the folks from Turning 15 and everything, that production, about some of their inspirations. And of course, you mentioned Gandhi and you mentioned Martin Luther King, but either locally or nationally, who are some of the folks that, as you have explored your own career, that inspired you? Because I love, and I'm sure folks that are watching would love to know more of some of the folks that inspired you in the sense of being activists and being involved in the world of politics, be that back home in India or be that back in this area or even back in West Virginia, because I know you have those West Virginia roots as well.
Yeah, I mean, I had a number of people. Obviously, my father's one of my heroes. And my late father-in-law, big influence on my life. I met him when I was 17. My mother-in-law is still my hero, and they were U.S. Air Force colonels. And I got really inspired when I saw, as a young college kid, immigrants coming in, and amazing to see Indians in fully blown uniforms in the U.S. Air Force. Quite intimidating when you're dating their daughter, but impressive to say the least. And he taught me about the value of serving your community and always putting yourself in a position to help as many people as often as you can. And that's why he loved serving as a doctor alongside his wife in the military. My father came here to be a surgeon. My late uncle, many of my family members were big parts of my life, and taught me that we should be proud to be Americans and to give back to our country, and that I always had the best of both worlds, my Indian heritage, but also, growing up in the mountain state of West Virginia, where my favorite music is country music. I love the West Virginia music. And then looking back, my heroes, looking at Gandhi and reading a lot about his life, Dr. King, Mandela, all these leaders, Lincoln, and some women leaders like Rosa Parks, Mother
Right.
Teresa, Michelle Obama, and now Kamala Harris. One hero that I recently reconnected with, and it was someone I always admired growing up, and I can't believe I reconnected with him, is John Chambers, who
Hmm.
grew up in West Virginia, and I knew his mother and father as a young kid, and he was quite a legend in West Virginia. He was a dyslexic. He came up through tremendous challenges educationally, and we read about him when he left Wang, and he was at IBM, and then went to the
Right.
small little company named Cisco, and had the reins of Cisco Systems for 20 years, and over that time acquired about 180 companies, and now he's an investor. But he's making, so I met him in Raleigh about a year and a half ago, and I he gave me his card, and I reconnected with him, and it's just weird. There was just this connection we had, maybe because I knew his mother and father, his father had died about last year. I knew his brother-in-law and his sister, who were my neighbors, and but he hosted my startup summit, and
Right.
in that we got to know each other, and it just to me was just amazing to to see somebody so successful but so humble, so committed as a successful executive to changing the world. And I just have been so amazed with the kind of work he's doing. And I think all of us as a family, it was a really great moment when I think it says a lot about someone's character, is that he has this thing called the playbook, which is no matter what he does, because he's also dyslexic, he has to be briefed, very prepared,
Right.
and the same playbooks, that they're all designed the same way. So we had to do a playbook on the Zoom event we were doing, and it was quite an amazing experience. He put me to work, and he said, "Look, anything I do the best, and I want to make sure that you're getting the best of this experience. But I have one favor to ask." He goes, "I'd like to meet your mom and dad when I Zoom in, just to see your parents." And so it was sort of amazing because three people came in with the Ron John Chambers link, and then my parents, "Ah, it's not John Chambers, you just typical politician, it's not going to happen." And then John showed up, and it just that amazing feeling of actually seeing someone that we've heard about and read about. But anyway, I think he's emerged as a family friend, and I'm just, he's advising Modi on India and Macron in France, and playing a big role right now in advising whoever becomes the president in terms of just how we deal with this pandemic and how we get our economy moving again. So,
Yeah. And you
yeah,
talk about those kind of family connections. I know here on IBM TV tomorrow, I believe it is, we'll have Homera, and I know that there was another show that you were on here, and you reconnected, and you're hoping to even do more reconnection with Homera. So I was just wondering, what was that Indian connection? Because, like I said, I know that she's
yeah,
got Indian.
that's an amazing story. I actually think I know her parents. So what happened? I was a lobbyist many years ago in West Virginia, and at that time, Joe Manchin was a state senator. He went on to become Secretary of State and governor. And I think Humera was in she worked for Governor Manchin when he was governor. And so Ryan. And I met her then, and I just couldn't believe it was the same Humera. And now so I met her. We're doing this radio podcast, and I see Humera. I can't believe it. She goes, "Steve Rao," and I'm like, "Oh my god!" So that's the connection. I mean, I tell you, West Virginia it's an amazing state. I mean, there's something about growing up in the hills of West Virginia, a bond that you build with your mountaineers that is so strong.
Mm.
And sometimes when I go to bed at night, I think about those hills and where I grew up. I mean, it was a small town. We had a beautiful downtown, and it was about community.
Well,
Literally, we would go do so much stuff. And I grew up on a tennis court pretty much, but being able to go downtown and go to a bakery, get a nice meal, go on the boulevard, walk the river, see the beautiful state capitol, being able to come out and see the mountains, it's beautiful, right? And so,
yeah.
now Joe Manchin, we see him on I remember when he lost the governor's race in 1996. We thought he was finished, and
Mm.
we were having some beers, sitting at a bar, and here he is, a U.S. senator, right? And then with Joe Biden now as president, who we thought, no, he's never going to come back, and he's not going to win the primary. So I think if there's any positive lining as I close out, is perseverance.
Right.
That if you stay the course, right, and believe in yourself, good things can happen.
That
So,
sounds really good, and I definitely can see that and everything. What is one of the things that you would think would surprise somebody about West Virginia? Because, like I said, I've got a couple of other friends that may done knew, and I think I might have known Maxine for a while, but have made this connection with her and some of her family members that's out of West Virginia. I remember my friend Gwen that used to own Blue Coffee in downtown was from West Virginia, and I've met a couple of other West Virginians. But what is something that you think that folks that don't know West Virginia would be surprised about this state that you are so proud to call part of your home roots and everything? And also that big country that's got billions of people. What is something along those same lines about India that you think that folks should know that they may not know? So I'd love to hear you give some of your perceptions of both of these places that are important to your own roots and your own family. So both, why West Virginia is so important to you, and what is something that would surprise people about West Virginia, and the same with India, the
well,
continent of India.
I think West Virginia over the years has gotten a bad rap of, there is a high level of poverty in Appalachia in the rural areas. I grew up in a more urban area, Charleston, where my dad was a surgeon. I think that the one thing people don't know about West Virginia is there are places in West Virginia like Charleston that's a very cosmopolitan, very wonderful community. The people are very simple, very hardworking. And I feel bad because they were left out because they didn't diversify the economy and built so much of the economy on coal. And then when I was growing up in Charleston, it was 85,000. Now it's under 40,000. So, I mean, it's just crazy. And Chambers actually has been working on creating a startup state strategy for West Virginia. Their governor is now Jim Justice. working with the West Virginia School of Business, which is named after John. And I think the key is, you know, I think that's one thing people don't understand about West Virginia is that it's not as backward as everyone thinks. The people are very hungry. They want to change. They want a state where people can come. But I think one thing is we all know you go to Snowshoe, you go to the New River Gorge. It's probably one of the most beautiful states in the country in terms of just the fall leaves, the mountains, the rapids, uh, Glade Springs Resort. So that's probably just the best unkept secret. And maybe that's one thing the state can do is to reach out to people like us. Our family's all here in North Carolina, give some kind of incentives for retirees to come back, or people like me. If Governor Justice called me and said, "Hey, Steve, why don't you come and help build back the state?" I would maybe go back to my home state and help build them back up. Because I've learned so much by being here in the Research Triangle, right? And
Yeah.
and so that's what I would say. Just the hard work ethic, the grace and humility of many West Virginians. Mountaineers are always free, And today I was running to my favorite song because I was running up a major hill. I had to kick on a little country roads from John Denver to get me through my 8-mile run this morning. But the final thing I'll say with India, one thing people don't understand about India is that India is a lot like the former Soviet Union. Many different states, many different languages. The independence of each state in India is as much as to a nation. So even when you're in Morrisville or Cary, there's not just one Indian community. It depends on whether you're from Gujarat, whether you're from Tamil Nadu, whether you're from Karnataka, whether you're from Andhra Pradesh or Telangana, whether you're from Delhi, where my mom grew up, Maharashtra, right, Punjab. And the delicacies and the cuisines and the dance and the food is that thing. So when you go and you say, "Are you from India?" they'll never answer your question. That "Where are you from?" They'll say, "I'm from Punjab. I'm from Gujarat, where Narendra Modi is from, the
Yeah.
Prime Minister of India. I met him in 2007. That's where my in-laws are from. That's where my wife's family is from." If you go to a hotel or many business owners, Patel, right? They're from that part of India, right? You see someone with a long South Indian name, they're probably in medicine. They're probably in technology.
Right.
You can sort of look and see. So that's one thing people don't understand about India. And I often tell the elected officials that research a little, even me, growing up in India, in the US, I didn't know as much about these traditions as some of my colleagues do, like Councilmember Garamella, who we can bring on the show. He's an immigrant. He knows all these traditions. He knows all the different things. I didn't. I'm a mountaineer, right? So.
Speaking of being a mountaineer, and then I'm going to bring up a couple of the spots to end the show before having to go to my 4 o'clock show. But one of the things I was curious about is you said you're a big bluegrass fan, and I've actually used to love going to the bluegrass festival there in Raleigh. It didn't happen, I don't think, this year because of COVID and everything. I don't even know if they did a virtual version. They may have, but I don't remember whether they did or not. But I heard you earlier say that you are a fan of bluegrass music. I know I'm a fan of Gangsta Grass, which is a band that mixes bluegrass and hip hop. And then there's folks like, I would argue the Carolina Chocolate Drops have a little bit of bluegrass in their musical style. But I was just wondering, who are some of your bluegrass folks that you enjoy, and who are some of the bluegrass musicians that you are big time fans of?
Well, I don't really follow the bluegrass too. I mean, John Denver, obviously my favorite. I follow Steve Martin when he comes in.
Right.
I'm a big country music fan. So when I said bluegrass, I really meant country music. But I love Kenny Rogers, Dolly Parton. I've been listening to all of the country stars. But I guess I need to. I go to the bluegrass festival. I don't follow the names, but I love watching Steve Martin. Sort of, we knew him as an actor, but a bluegrass expert. The John Denver bluegrass kind of music
Right.
and country music, and I've been listening a lot to Kenny Rogers recently because I just loved his music, and I love to whether it's The Gambler or Coward of the County or Islands in the Stream or you just listen to that music and it just really hits home, right? So, but I
No,
guess I
and
gotta learn my bluegrass music.
No, and country music is great too. I remember growing up and would sometimes watch, and I'll admit it, would watch Hee Haw and watch some of those corny, kind of campy country music songs. So I would watch those sometimes. And I'm a big fan of blues music. And to me, blues and country come out of that same kind of roots background. So I definitely find them to be very much connected. While one may be seen as more of a European style music and another may be seen more as a African American style music, they do have a lot of similarities, and a lot of folks forget that the banjo, which is a major country instrument, has African roots. So definitely there's a lot of ties to the ways the music are connected. But yeah, I definitely can appreciate some of the great country musicians. You mentioned Dolly, and I definitely think that she's tremendously great, as well as Crystal Gale and a number of other ones, Tammy Wynette. So there have been some great country musicians out there, including some of the more modern ones. So are there any of the modern ones or any of the classic country stars that you would like to give a shout out to that you're big fans of?
Even though he's a little bit conservative, I like Toby Keith, some of his patriotic songs. I do a lot of stuff for veterans. Garth Brooks, Carrie Underwood, you know, all of the greats. I mean, they're all wonderful, right?
Yeah,
And hopefully I can get more, listen to
yeah,
more country music at night and stuff like that. And but thank you for having me on. I mean, I think I'd
yeah.
like to come back on, and maybe
Oh
in a
yeah,
couple weeks we can talk about political stuff. And
oh yeah.
the one thing, I like to always end my shows with people on things they don't know. I do a lot of work in immigration. Number one, um, our university students, there's 21,000, many of them internationally. They contribute about 713 million to our economy. The Dreamers contribute 500 million to our economy, and we have 100 and we have 56,000 immigrant-owned businesses that employ 151,000 people. So these are
Wow.
important statistics from New American Economy. I serve on a board of that, which is a bipartisan coalition of mayors and business leaders. But the reason I say that is immigration is often a dirty word. Someone that says when someone's coming in, they're stealing a job, they're stealing something. So hopefully we can get this data out there to the public and have a more informed discussion, even with Republicans that are against immigration reform, because I think it's important to build a narrative. And we can come back and I can bring some experts on the show to talk to you about these matters. I'm talking to WRL this evening on I'm doing an interview with them on some of these things. But thank you so much. And
No, no problem. I would love to have you come back on and everything. And I'm going to say we're getting ready to wrap everything up. But I would love to hear your, like I left with the team from Turning 15, your thoughts on kind of like a book of inspiration. It doesn't have to be it was in their case, an art book of inspiration, but it can be any book of inspiration that you would like to share with our audience, as well as any positive thoughts that you would like to leave with our audience. Because I often do that with a lot of my interviewees, is I give them a chance to give their positive thought that they would like to share with the world, as well as in don't do it with every show, but some shows I'll ask either a book or a piece of music that they would like to share with the world as well, that they find inspiring in their lives.
well, I would. I mean, I'm sorry I've been on such a John Chambers theme, but his book is great lessons for leadership in a startup world, and it's really fascinating because he really weaves in his connections to West Virginia, how he overcame dyslexia, how it forced him to deal with it, and the story of his family, and this whole idea of developing a playbook, which I think you can take and apply to different areas of your life. So I've drawn inspiration of it as a government leader in terms of helping Morrisville, the Triangle region, dealing with the pandemic, in terms of having a playbook, being prepared, so that we know what, just like you're playing a football game to play. So it's called Lessons for Leadership in a Startup World. The other book I read that's not inspiring, but I would really recommend it, is 10 Lessons for a Post-Pandemic World by Fareed Zakaria. Quite fascinating in terms of the impact COVID-19 is going to have on cities, on economic development, on politics, on governing. And I think it's an important book for all of us to read, because COVID is going to affect us not only now, but in the future. And I have a number of books. I could probably send you a list. There's so many great books, but I would say that Lessons for Leadership in a Startup World. And I'm going to be getting Obama's book, The Promised Land, which I would recommend. They did a 60 Minutes piece. That looks like a very inspiring book, talking about democracy, talking about division in America, and how we move forward from the 44th president, Barack Obama. So and then I guess I'll end with my final message is just a story that I told a couple of weeks ago, that one of my friends, True Pettigrew, who leads the barbershop rap sessions, was talking about how he was in New York in 2013, and all the hotels were out with light, but there was one hotel near LaGuardia whose light was on. And when they went to the manager, they asked him, why was that light on? And he said the reason the light was on, they had their own gas generator, because they didn't want their ability of light to be dependent on outside sources. And it goes back to that my positive message of Diwali and light, and that our own light doesn't have to be dependent on the darkness, the division, the uncertainty. Our own light can be through our good works. So good works could be the work that our first responders are doing. The Hindu Society of North Carolina Temple manufacturing masks, delivering meals to first responders. The Tamil Sangam group, an immigrant group that worked to bring 2,000 masks to our fire department. Or the Chinese American Friendship Association that raised lots of money and donated millions of dollars of PPE equipment. It goes on and on and on, right? But there's so many good things we can do, but that light can always shine. And the greatest GPS in our heart is our heart, not the phone, not the connection. We can find our way if we listen to understand, not only listen to reply. And I think that's the biggest advice I would give to the young high school kids that I speak to every day, is that it's about building community. And it starts at the local level. And the trees in Yosemite Park don't grow to the greatest of heights for by chance. What we often don't realize is those roots are only 2 inches in diameter. But the reason they grow to the greatest of heights is because they grow in communities. And so I think that's what we have to do. We have to grow our communities again. I hope that's a good message.
No, that's a very good message and a very positive message. And I definitely appreciate that. Appreciate you being on, as well as Miranda Berry, as well as Mr. Hyman, as well as Quayade as well. So definitely appreciate all of y'all for being on the show and sharing some very positive and enlightening thoughts. I'm going to bring on some of our spots about some of our upcoming shows that exist here on IBM TV, including one of our shows that deals with investment. And then, of course, we'll wrap it all up with the radio show with Mark Lee theme song. And then, of course, I've got to get ready to jump off and do Mullins music and memories. But get ready to have some great conversation as well. But definitely glad to have you on, Steve. And it was a great conversation and glad you were able to join me.
Thank you, everyone around the world.